Oh boy, technology. Hello, everyone. This is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Rebel. Welcome to the Jeet Kune Dialogues, episode number 345. This is a highly requested redo or second volume two of last weekend's Ask Me Anything with yours truly. So if as you're logging in, if you'd be kind enough to say where you're logging in from, if you'd hit the like button and feel free to continue doing so throughout the dialogue. If you're catching the simulcast over on the YouTube, please be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell over there as well. But of course, the best thing you can do is to share this dialogue and spread the word about the share the video, Dwight, and spread the word about the Jeet Kune dialogues. Okay. So last weekend we're in Dallas, and Ronnie Reagan and I were able to salvage the the American Airlines debacles with baggage delivery, and then the endless drive to the car rental agency, and then get to the hotel and check in, and only be 30 minutes late. Right, so that worked out fairly well. And we had a great time, and everybody asked if we would do it again this week. But I suspect, because, sometimes people will say stuff and they'll ask for stuff and what have you. And then when you go ahead and you give it to them, right, they don't show up, they disappoint you or what have you. My friend G. Anthony Joseph and I were having a conversation about that today, about um, being being disappointed by the people in whom you invest, and it's not a touchy subject. It's hard, especially as dedicated martial artists. It's hard not to um, give a damn about people who are coming to you on a regular and consistent basis to train with you. You'd have to be some kind of evil human being to be, especially taking money from people to train them and not give a damn about them and their development. And so then it becomes kind of almost personal if you invest time and energy in them, and then their let's how should I put it, then their behavior back towards you, right, is less than what you expected. I'll put it that way, right? It's kind of hard not to take it not to take it on, as we would say in the islands, right? But anyhow, that's not what the Ask Me Anything is about. Um, I did get a few questions before today, and a couple of them people asked to remain anonymous. I don't know why they, and it's none of my business, right? Let them do what they want to do. Okay, because but there is still this thing in the Jeet Kune world about getting yourself in trouble, right? And Ronnie Reagan, he'll know perhaps more intimately than a lot of people about getting in trouble because of certain things that you might say or do in the JKD world, right? Not that he and I care that much. Anyhow, but people do. It's like, oh, I don't want to cause waves, or I don't want anybody to know that this is what I'm thinking or what have you. And yeah, I get it. I guess my objection is simply because I wish it wasn't that way. That people are free and willing to say whatever it is that they want to say about Jeet Kune. Because look, the more time that I spend, um, in time, commitment, and functionality, the more I realize how much left undone Bruce Lee is responsible for. Not responsible for, but how much there was still for Bruce Lee to do, to try to achieve. And it's not his fault. I mean, he didn't intend to die, right? And it's simply because, well, he kicked the bucket before too long. He was 32 years old, so um, he didn't get as far as he could have gotten or would have gotten, right? So to then turn around and dedicate yourself to a work in progress, and you yourself you're not dedicated to being your own work in progress, right? Dig this. Bruce Lee was a work in progress. He dies, and then people dedicate themselves to his incomplete, unfinished work in progress instead of following his example and becoming works in progress themselves wherever it is that search would lead you. You get what I'm talking about? You understand where I'm coming from? Right? Well, anyhow, okay. So, in terms of the questions that came in, so Mark David Collins from the UK, he asked me if I wrote it down here. If Bruce Lee took any kicks from like Japanese karate, right? From Shotokan karate, I think he said. And my understanding is that there was a demonstration, I think, by Hidetaka Nishiyama, and Bruce Lee was impressed by Nishiyama's demonstration. I don't know if he was impressed specifically by Nishiyama's kicking. I think I did hear something like that. I think I heard something like that from Richard Torres. And when it comes to the intimate details of Bruce Lee's thinking, right? Richard Torres is somebody that you could listen to, not on everything, but on some things, right? Um, so I think I heard something like that Bruce Lee was impressed by Nishiyama's demonstration, and maybe it was, but I'll tell you this: ultimately, Bruce Lee's kicking method didn't look anything like Shotokan kicking. If you look at the pictures from Chinese Kung Fu, the Chinese Kung Fu book, and you will see stuff where the hip isn't turned over as much. And then if you look at pictures from the fighting method, so we're talking now 62 versus 1967, I think, and you'll see that Bruce Lee's hip action appears to be a little bit different now. So maybe it's possible. I wasn't there. I can't. I'm not the authority. So if he was influenced by Nishiyama in the beginning when it came to kicking, but Bruce Lee didn't learn kicking when he came to the States, right? He had spent a little bit of time in Hung-ga, or the Hung style, so I'm sure that he had been introduced to kicking before. But maybe Nishiyama did have some kind of impact on him, and then maybe other people. We know that he was good friends with Junri, and so it's quite possible that Junri and his Taekwondo kicking that had an influence on Bruce Lee as well. But I say just look at Bruce Lee's kicking himself. That kick from this movie, right? That Bob Wall kick from this movie is definitely not a Shotokan style kick. There's no two ways about it, right? Um, so it's possible, but I don't know to what degree. Okay. All right. Then let's see. Frank says Eddie Bravo says that his body is so badly beaten up from decades of rolling around that he can't do it anymore. He needs to slow down like Helio Gracie did. Yeah, I've heard this. I've heard this fairly often about BJJ people. In fact, I think I heard once that it takes Hicks and Gracie. I think it takes Hicks and Gracie. The way it was expressed is that It takes Hicks and Gracie 30 minutes to get out of bed, right? I know of one JKD associated guy, the late great Hal Faulkner, um, and Hal said at one point that he wished that he had continued. Actually, he said he wished he had continued with the Kali, right, instead of spending most of his time, if not all of his time, in the BJJ, right? And yeah, I mean, Sifu Dan talks about um, the effect, the toll that aging will take or will have on your body. And I think the nature of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, being on your back, rolling around, and that type of stuff, um, like anything else, there's going to be wear and tear, right? But yeah, and somebody as flexible as Eddie Bravo, right? For him to say that, yeah, that's kind of that. Well, hopefully that'll be Frank. That'll be a wake up call for those in the BJJ world who need it, right? And we'll see. Yeah, right. So, like I was saying last week, I had a lot of people throwing a lot of questions at me. In fact, so much that I couldn't even get to one of the things that I wanted to talk about. But we don't have any time constraints tonight. Um, so, if you guys want, as we progress, to just throw stuff at me, I see Red Tiger, Tim Rettiger is here, Simon Alpin's here, Mark Black is here, Terry Valor, right? Bucky's here, and Ron Reagan himself, right? So I'm sure. Come on, you guys can come up with questions for me um, to keep me entertained, and then I in turn can keep you entertained, right? Joe Jacobs from the UK asked. He said, "I'd like to know." Why do you think people are still arguing about Jeet Kune? Well, Joe, I can tell you right now, people are still arguing about Jeet Kune because they have nothing better to do, right? They have nothing better to do. Plus, people like to spout their opinions. I mean, I'm one of them, right? And people like to be right, versus being wrong. So there's all kinds of reasons why. And especially this concepts versus original thing, right? But Joe says because we all love martial art, so can't both sides be right? Well, no, both sides can't be right because in order in order for one side to declare that they are right, then they have to declare that the other side is wrong, and vice versa. So both sides can't be right, and we just learn and grow like we're supposed to. Everybody will agree, Joe, on the surface, that we are all supposed to learn and grow. Where they will disagree is how you learn and grow. So there are some who will tell you that they can learn and grow without changing a single thing that they got from Bruce Lee. I don't need to change anything. I've had people tell me all the time, there is no need, or there was no need for Inosano, for example, to investigate or research anything else because Bruce Lee did all the heavy lifting. So apparently, the idea behind that is that everything that there was out there that could ever be taken into consideration, Bruce Lee took into consideration, did the heavy lifting, and therefore it is unnecessary. I'm trying to adjust this thing here, right? So I don't have too much headroom. And therefore it is unnecessary for any Bruce Lee follower to go look at anything else. Well, that's ridiculous. You know what? I'm rereading Jesse Glover's book. Um, uh, Shoot, what's the title? Between, um, Now I can't remember the title, but it has something about between Wing Chun and Jeet Kune Do, right, or something like that. And it's a 1976 book, I think it is, right. So I'm rereading that, and it would appear from reading what Jesse Glover says that Bruce Lee was investigating other things beyond Wing Chun, beyond Tai Chi, Hung style, that Bruce Lee had taken a look at a number of different things. But I don't know yet. I only started rereading it just yesterday. So I don't know yet to what degree Bruce Lee was influenced by these other things. And Jesse Glover was with him only up until 1962, I think, right? From 1960 to 1962. Bruce Lee himself will tell you that it was in 66 that he started, that he changed the gist of his training, to quote him. So that was 4 years after Jesse Glover was off the scene. But I think that Glover does a pretty good job thus far of indicating that Bruce Lee's mind was definitely not one that settled for anything. That was definitely not one that was unquestioning. Okay, so Joe, because there's a lot that is known about Bruce Lee, but then there's a lot, or maybe just as much, that is unknown about Bruce Lee. And because there are people who will have an opinion on the stuff that they do know about, and they will have an opinion on the stuff that they do not know about. That's why we will always have discussions and debates about Bruce Lee. And one central issue is this controversy between concepts and original. People love that. They love to talk about that. And as opposed to realizing that the concepts approach was not meant to stand in opposition, or even um, as an alternative choice, right, to original. I mean, they didn't exist. Okay. Dan Inosanto coined the term Jeet Kune Do concepts um, to illustrate that he didn't want to break a promise to Bruce Lee to teach JKD to the masses. And so what he wanted to do instead was to show how concepts of Jeet Kune Do could be found and or applied in other martial art methods. That was the original intention. What we should discuss one of these days is how well or not was that intention fulfilled. You know what I mean? All right. Okay. So apparently, people were just warming up. They were waiting for me to spout off, and then they were warming up because I see a ton of stuff rolling in here. So I am going to go chronologically as they showed up in the feed. Right. Tim Becker says, I think many of y'all have. Tim, I can't put this up. This is way too this is way too long, right? I don't think it'll fit on the well, let me see. But I don't think okay, I can't read that. That print is way too small, right? I think many of y'all have much more discerning eyes for kicks than I have. You don't really think that, Tim. I don't know the difference between a taekwondo kick and a karate kick, and a big chunk of the kicks from, oh, Tim, please, right? And a big chunk of the kicks from Savat and consequently Junfan, other than the names they're being called. I studied three types. Tim is too funny. I studied three types of Southeast Asian kickboxing, and I couldn't tell you the difference by looking at them between a kick from Muay Thai, a kick from Kun Khmer, and a kick from Letway. I'm willing to concede that my eye is not that good, I guess. Well, okay, Tim, since I have better eyes than you do, I'm kidding, right? The kicks from Muay Thai, Pradal Sere and Letway are going to be almost identical. I don't think there's going to be that much of a discernible difference between those three. But if you look at Box Française has a chamber for their kicks that is quite similar to the chamber from some taekwondo systems. So, for example, if you take a look, if you take a side by side comparison um, of the late great Salem Asli and the chamber for, let's say, for his sidekick, right, his chasseo, and then you look at Chong Li's dynamic kicks book, right, and the chamber of the knee position for his sidekick. And then if you look at James Liu's art of dynamic stretching and kicking, and look at his knee chamber, and then look at Bill Wallace's dynamic stretching book and the position of his chamber, you're going to see similarities across those four for sure. You're going to see similarities. Now, if you look at classical Shotokan chambering, their chamber is completely different because the chamber is more, the foot is closer to the knee of the support leg, right? Because it's kind of turned in this way. Whereas with those others, the knee is up and the foot is turned, not turned out, but instead of in towards this knee, it's actually out and pointing, so to speak, more at the opponent rather than pointing away from the opponent. So if you have the discerning eyes, you can definitely, Tim, and I know everything that I just said, you already know. You're just kidding around, right? Um, so I think, guys, what Tim's point is that a kick is a kick, right? A kick is a kick. So um, we don't have to discuss them a whole lot. But if somebody did, in all seriousness, Tim, if somebody did ask, well, what's the difference? Is there a difference, or is a kick just a kick? Yeah, a kick is just a kick if what you're trying to do is to deliver punishment or damage to somebody using your leg. Then a kick is just a kick. But it is possible to, like I just did, sit down and detail um, distinctions between delivery methods or what have you, right? You know what I liked about one of the things I liked about Dynamic Kicks, the Chong Li book, is how um, all the beginner kicks were on the ground, right? And then there was the higher version was the jumping variation. And then the higher version was the flying variation, right? I really enjoyed that. Now that I'm older, I just do the beginner version. I just stay on the ground and try to kick from there, right? But yeah, um, Terry Valor says I have torn my quad and calf in BJJ. Yeah, because you started late, Terry Valor. Exactly, right? Yeah, we should have gotten into BJJ when we were in our teens or something, right? Yeah. Um, Red Tiger says, I think Lee gave us the way when he said, "Your JKD is not my JKD," or something like that. He was telling us that he was not the end. Um, yeah, actually, I'm going to touch on that in a different way, but a similar theme, Tim, in a little bit. I think that Bruce Lee, apart from the fact that he was heavily influenced by a certain esoteric way, a certain esoteric philosophical way of expressing things, right? So your truth is not my truth. He might have taken that because he's very fond of doing that. In fact, let me see. I'm gonna jump, as they say. I'm gonna jump the gun here for a second. No, I'm not, because I don't have it here with me. But give me a second, because I didn't tell you guys. I did have to change. I did have to change accounts. Oh shoot! And now I took it away from. Oh man! All right, so I can't. I don't have access to it. All right, ignore that. Um, um, One of the things that Bruce Lee would do when appropriating a quote or a statement from Krishnamurti, he would take truth, the word truth, and he would change it to Jeet Kune. So it's very possible that whole "your truth is not my truth" could have come from Krishnamurti. I don't know. And then Bruce Lee just opted to change truth to Jeet Kune. So then your Jeet Kune is not my Jeet Kune. And yeah, but that doesn't mean that we don't study the same thing. It doesn't mean that we don't study the same way. What it means is that I can't be you because you're Tim Rettiger and I'm Dwight Woods. But we could join, we could start studying Jeet Kune with the same person at the same time and go to the same classes, right? Every time, take the same lessons, and over a period of time, as we develop, we're not going to look the same. There's no way. It's not going to happen. And that's the nature of Jeet Kune. Now, there is somewhat of an emphasis, or there used to be in the old days, somewhat of an emphasis on looking a particular way in Shotokan. Because if it didn't look a particular way, then it wasn't supposed to be Shotokan, right? I don't know how they deal with that type of thing. Um, would Come on. Sorry, that never happens. All right. So what was I saying? Yeah, I don't know if in modern day Shotokan, if there's such a thing, if the emphasis has changed, right, and people are now supposed to they're allowed to look different, or if look in a particular way. I should really check that out. Somebody check and tell me if you're still, if everybody's still supposed to look the same way when you do Shotokan or any of the classical systems, or what have you. I wonder about that, right? Anyhow, let's move on. um, Mick Tully, Mick Tully says, watch him from God's country. Mick, you're in the States? Right? Kwaku James, my good friend, says, what you just said about Bruce was close to what I was saying last week. Well, yeah, Kwaku, because we're both smart. You're smarter than I am, but yeah, of course, I know that you and I see quite similarly on this stuff, right? Mark Goulet says, how many levels to be a high level coach in your system? Should I know at least two? Sombrella? Should I know at least two umbrella? I know of one umbrella. What? How many levels to be a high level coach in your system? Should I know at least two sunbrella? I know of one sunbrella, two sticks. Okay, I got to do a lot of interpreting here, Mark. How many levels to be a high level coach in your system? Um, to be a high level, I don't use the term coach, but I get what you mean. But to be high level with me, you'd have to be around me and have been on the receiving end of my instruction for at least 10 years in order for me to consider you high level. And even then, I might not, right? But at least 10 years. Now, should I know at least two sunbrella? So I'm wondering if you're confusing sombrada and umbrella. And if you're talking about two umbrella, if it's pretty funny. I don't mean to laugh, but it's kind of funny. Should I know at least two sombrada? I guess maybe you're talking about sombrada patterns, right? You say you know of one with two sticks. So if Ron Reagan's still on here, that would be like the double stick sombrada that we were doing um, last weekend versus single stick sombrada. I have no idea, Mark, if that's what you're talking about. But no, to be a high level coach in my system, I won't quibble over that wording, right? But to be a high level coach in my system, no, you wouldn't have to know at least two sombrada patterns or whatever. You'd have to know what sombrada is really meant for. You'd have to know how it should really be used. Okay. Scorch says in one letter written in 1983, Sifudan refers to Taki Kimura as his senior and Ted Wong as his junior. In your opinion, what context was Sifudan using those terms? Or chronological context, because Taki Kimura started training with Bruce Lee in what, 1959 or 1960 or so? So that's 4 or 5 years before Dan Inosanto even met Bruce Lee. And then Ted Wong, what is it? Ted Wong spent 6 months or so at the Chinatown School, which opened up in February of 1967. So then, let's say by August of 67, Ted Wong was a private student of Bruce Lee's until the end. So chronologically, Ted Wong would be his junior because he started training with Bruce Lee after Inosanto. So I think that's just the context that Inosanto was using, senior and junior. Taki Kimura started before him. Ted Wong started after him. That's it. Del Mountain says, I know a 35-year-old man who says he feels like he's 70 because he's been training in BJJ since the age of 17. He's about to quit BJJ because it is affecting his mobility. Man, yeah, but Del, I don't know if that happens across the board, right? Because I am fairly sure for everybody that we might find afflicted this way, 35 years old, but you feel that you're twice your age, I wouldn't be surprised if we can find another BJJ person who feels the opposite. And I think it might just come down to emphasis in training because I never saw it in action, but I think the correct way to pronounce his name is Hodger, right? Even though it looks like Roger, but Hodger Machado, who is what yoga jitsu, I think is what they call his approach. And I've seen people who are whose mobility exercises look a lot like BJJ exercises. So it might just be a particular thing, an individual thing as to how it is that these people were training, what it is that they were training in their BJJ, and maybe not paying attention to another aspect. But it seems to me that there could be or should be a tight connection between yoga type stuff and jujitsu type stuff, or what people call now. In the old days, I think we just used to call it stretching, right? But now it's called mobility or something. Like in the old days, you used to work your abs. Now you work your core, right? I think I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, it is kind of alarming though, Del, that a fair amount of BJJ people will talk about that. But I don't know. I don't know what the statistics are on it. If there's more or less. But yeah, it's sad no matter what. However it turns out. All right. Ooh. Oh gosh. Oh Lord. Frank, I think you must listen in on my conversations with my favorite Canadian Jeet Kune senior, Cass Magda. All right. Okay. So we hear the term empty hand Kali, but we never hear empty hand Arnis or empty hand Eskrima. Why do you think that is? Okay. So I'm going to disagree with you a little bit because in the um, um, modern Arnis, in the modern Arnis system, I'm pretty sure that they use the term mano mano for their empty hands. But maybe, yeah, maybe you don't hear the term empty hand arnis, right? Maybe you don't. So you might be right on that. But in terms of, so I'm asking kind of a different question from what you asked. Is there empty hand arnis or empty hand eskrima? Yes, there is, right? But yeah, you might be right that we hear empty hand kali. But why is it that we hear the term empty hand kali? Because one of the most famous exponents of Filipino martial art used the term Kali as an umbrella term for Filipino martial arts. So when he would show the weapons training, okay, all right, everybody knows Kali, Arnis, and Eskrima has weapons training, but then he would show the empty hand portion. And so you just refer to it as empty hand Kali. And because he's very famous, and you all know who I'm talking about, right? Because he's very famous, then the term gets repeated and it gets spread around. Whereas the other people, how well known is Remy Precious's empty hands stuff? How well known is the Doce Paris empty hand stuff? Probably not that well known, right? But now in Asano empty hands, oh my God, right? Come on. Okay. He's the one that pushed the Pangamut, right? It's probably because of Inasano that the whole Panantukan and Sikaran and Panandiakman, that all that stuff came about because Dan Inasano wanted to show the Filipino martial arts to be like Jeet Kune, an expression of totality. So there was weapons training, and there is weapons training, and there's empty hands training as well. I've told you guys that before. So the way we looked at, I think last week we talked about it, the so-called, right? So-called four ranges of combat: kicking, punching, trapping, grappling. Okay. So what's the Filipino kicking? Sikaran or Panandiakman? What's the Filipino punching? Right? Um, Suntukan or Panantukan? What's the trapping? Tie up and hit, untie and hit, right? Higot hubad. What's the grappling? Dumog, layog, tapon, um, buno, kunsi, right? All that stuff. Because there's a word for throw, there's a word for lock, right? There's a word for takedown, right? All that. So that's why that, because in the sound spent equal amounts of time on weapons training and empty hands training, and showing how the empty hand stuff. I was telling Mark David Collins just yesterday that in the 1980s I started using it because I ripped it off from the brochures for the Inasano Academy, where it talked about um, the weaponry being a secret method for turbocharging your empty hands. So from the get go, I would say Dan Inasano has always um, insisted on that totality of approach in Filipino Kali, weapons and empty hands, and that's probably why the term is heard. That term is heard more often or more so than anything else. If anybody was to ask me, that's what I would say, Frank. Right? Um, Red Tiger says, following on Eddie Bravo, one must ask, if our martial art leaves us physically damaged, are we doing something wrong? Most definitely. Shouldn't long term health be a goal? Yes. And I think, as I was talking about that earlier, Tim, I was thinking of Dave Kovar, right? The great Dave Kovar. And if you follow him, if you see his stuff, um, Dave is very successful. Um, Traditional martial artist, but whose mind, he went open minded a long time ago. He's trained with a lot of people in the JKD and Kali world, including Burton Richardson, for example. And I saw him recently showing some mobility stuff, right? Stuff that is part of his personal regimen of training. And I'm wondering, because I know he trains BJJ also, I'm wondering if people like him, who's somebody else that emphasizes the whole long term health goals? Tom Callis. Now, what do Tom Callis and Dave Kovar have in common? Training in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. So I'm wondering if at some point they experience something like that. This is all coming, going on in my head right now. I'm not making any statements of fact or what have you, but I'm wondering if at some point in their jujitsu training, especially Tom Callis, because if I remember correctly, Tom Callis has had both hips replaced, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if a guy like that is like, okay, this Brazilian jiu-jitsu thing is wreaking havoc to a certain degree on my two hips. And so I need to modify, adjust, or something if I'm going to be able to keep walking or something. I'm being dramatic, but I wouldn't be surprised if people like that, people like Kovar and Callis, realize that there is a new kind of wear and tear, because Tom Callis came from the Taekwondo world, right? So he would have experienced the knee replacement stuff, right? Um, and then some people in Taekwondo do have to go through the hip replacement stuff, and then to go into to Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and now your hips are being forced to work in a whole new different way from kicking. Yeah, right. Kovar's base system. It wasn't Kempo karate. I don't think it was Kempo, but it was a karate method, but I can't remember which one. Right, but anyhow, but then he gravitated towards the jujitsu as well, and so yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we were to ever find out that it was because of jujitsu that those two started to emphasize the whole wellness aspect. But yeah, specifically as you're asking, if your martial art training leaves you physically damaged, you got to be doing something wrong. It can't be the thing for you. That's not what's supposed to happen. Dell says that Bruce Lee said that kung fu was born from the twin influences of Taoism and Zen. However, Zen is infused with Taoism. So is it fitting to say that kung fu is derived from Zen Buddhism? No, because Zen Buddhism is Japanese Buddhism. Taoism is similar to Buddhism. This is as far as I know. The Kung Fu connection is supposed to be that Bodhidharma came over from India to Shaolin and taught the Shaolin monks a meditation thing, right? But I don't know that Bodhidharma taught them any fighting stuff because he was a Buddhist priest, if you call it that, right? This is as far as I know. So I could be dead wrong, right? So based on that, now when Bruce Lee talks about the twin influences of Taoism and Zen, I think what he's trying to do is to highlight that there's a nominal difference, I guess, between Taoism of Lao Tzu and Zen of I can't even remember the name of the founder of Zen Buddhism. But Zen Buddhism, isn't that known as Chan Buddhism in China? Right? So there's what? Hindu Buddhism, Chan Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, and then Taoism, right? I think. So is it fitting to say that Kung Fu is derived from Zen Buddhism? No, not derived from it. Not Kung Fu, the physical art. No, I wouldn't say that it's derived from Zen Buddhism at all. Um, so I'd have to look to see where that particular quote is from, right? Kung Fu was born from the twin influences of Taoism and Zen, because I'm not familiar with that specific quote. But if you could tell me, Del, where that's found, I can look at the passage above it and the passage below it, then I'd have a better understanding of the context of it. But I would disagree that that Kung Fu is derived from Zen Buddhism, even though um, with Bruce Lee and the way he talked about Kung Fu, he used a lot of Taoist sayings and philosophical sayings, and we know that Bruce Lee himself was highly influenced, right, by those philosophies. Okay, enough on that, right? Simon says the Jesse Glover book is brilliant. Seems that the early years were more self-preservation oriented, whereas the later stuff was more sparring inspired, reciprocal exchange. Well, he said that. He said that, didn't he, Simon? In the letter to either William Chung or Wong Sheng Lung, where he talks about in 1966 when he went more in the direction of sparring with the protective equipment. I don't think that they were sparring in quite the same way in Seattle during the Glover times. That came later. So yeah, I would say in fact this is kind of a an additional answer to what Cesar Polyakov asked last week, right? About what major changes might there have been in Bruce Lee's approach. When Bruce Lee started to use more training equipment, right? So, for example, in Los Angeles, right, the kick shield and the focus mitts and that type of stuff, I don't know that there was any of that type of stuff in Seattle or even in Oakland. I think all of that equipment training, more, the usage of stuff that you would see more in a boxing gym. I think all of that happened in the Los Angeles era. So yeah, right. The early years, I'd agree with you, Simon. Definitely. Um, I mean, it was still all self preservation, but the approach to training that self preservation it was probably very different, right? Michael Perez from Ohio. Hello. Brooks wants to know who's the next guest gonna be. um, so hey, Brooks, how about we make it you? I just had a thought. I'm putting you on the spot. I'm what do they call it? Throwing down the gauntlet. That's not what I really mean. But how about we make it you, Brooks? Right? Mick Shore says, I have, oh, man, Mick, what is it with you and Tim Becker that your comments are like the longest things, and then I got to squint to read all this stuff, huh? What is up with that, right? I have herniated disc and neck, back and neck, and dislocated hips, as well as torn anterior and interior ligaments learning BJJ. By the time I got black, I had broken nearly everything in my body. Was it worth it? Hell yeah. Right. Of course. Right. Because he's glad to be part of the 1% club that gets a BJJ black belt. Right. Um, and these days, talk about self preservation. These days, I spar and weight train, do yoga and Wim Hof training to heal injury, and I'm in better shape than most half my age, right? Eddie competed at high level and chose a method and a route that will see him go down in BJJ history. Everything in life has a price to pay for high level success. Yeah, yeah, right. Mick, you should probably get in touch with Eddie Bravo and introduce him to some of what you're doing, right, to help him repair himself, right? Um, Magazine Retriever says, I just read a letter that Dan Inosanto wrote to a popular magazine challenging their inaccurate statements that Chuck Norris and Bob Wall taught an inexperienced Bruce Lee Tang Soo Do. So I'm wondering if that was the letter to Bob Guccione or to Penthouse Magazine or what have you, right? I wonder if that was it. I can't find absorb what is useful right now, but that could be it. Tim wants to know who owns a kick. I do. Right. Eric Gaskin wants to know where do I get all those groovy T-shirts? Oh man, that's secret. That's secret JKD stuff, Eric. Right now, I haven't. I actually, I'm way overdue. Right um, for storing up on new T-shirt designs and what have you. So actually, if you want to talk about new to well, this is not new. This is actually that's an old design, but it's available again, right? Uh, and this is one of my favorite, right? The four tenet. Well, it's one of my favorite because I came up with the term the four tenets of Jeet Kune, right? So that's where the heck is the front of it? Well, I just have an image of the back of it, right? The front of it just says four tenets of Jeet Kune, right? So that's one of them. This is some of the other stuff that's available at rebelgear.printify.me, right? I gotta. Oh yeah, I didn't do it on this one, right? Um, Let me see if I have it here. I don't. Anyhow, but this is some of the stuff that's available, right? This is the Legends in the Room coffee mug. That's also a T-shirt. That's the Fire and Focus T-shirt, right? Coffee mug as well, because that's how I'm gonna start everything, right? T-shirt, coffee mug, sticker, then go on to hoodie, and then ultimately bath towels. That's an inside joke. Ronnie Reagan will get the joke, right? But anyhow, so yeah, so if you want, Eric, some cool one of a kind design from the creative mind of Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Do Rebel, right? Go to rebelgear.printify.me and you can start your collection over there because as many designs as I can think about, I will be rolling out at my own store. Okay. So thanks for that opportunity to plug myself, Eric. All right. I cracked myself up. Now I gotta find how to remove this. See, that's why I should never. There we go. Okay. All right. Let me get back to scrolling through. Give me a sec. I can't find where I left off. That's funny. Okay, there we go. Right, who owns a kick? Right. Eric says. Simon says a kick is just a kick, but the JKD principles might change the kick. Well, then the kick wouldn't be a kick, right? Um, oh, I guess that's a. I get Brooks. I guess that's a question for Simon, right? Not for me, right? Or does Simon have a book on Bruce Lee? Is that I'm confused by this, right? Really is an amazing book. I'm confused. You guys are talking above my head, right? Scort says that Bolo Young practices Tai Chi every day and has no noticeable mobility issues. Once a person gets a certain age, maybe you should transition from BJJ to Tai Chi. Man, once we all get to a certain age, we should transition to Tai Chi, I think, right? Pete Richardson says the best kick is the one that lands, right? Uh, Tim Becker says, I'm not overly familiar with who Bruce kept in touch with and who he didn't. Did he and Jesse Glover stop talking at some point before Bruce's death? I heard something like that too, but I have no idea um, if that's true or not. Right? I have no idea. Bob Landers wants to know where did Bruce Lee say your JKD is not my JKD? I don't know. Yeah, I was questioning it too. Bob. I'd love to find the location of the. But who was it that said it? Was it Red Tiger? If it was him, he said something like that. Not he didn't say that it was a direct quote, right? And Brooke says they visited again when Bruce visited Linda's family in Seattle, I believe. Right? Okay. All right. So yeah, uh, maybe, maybe not. Brooke says I haven't heard that ringer in over 10 years. Oh, when the phone rang. That was a phone from the 80s. You guys are killing me. You guys are killing me. All right. Um, Renee Cocola says, Renee, Renee is he's such a character. Is it true that Bruce would only eat chicken fingers every second Sunday of even numbered months? No, no, Renee. He reserved chicken fingers for holiday weekends that occurred in every month that had Burr in its name. I think that's what it was, right? And do I think Bruce would rather be a Jedi or a Sith? I don't know, man. We have some people on Facebook who seem to think more in terms of being Jedi's, right? So um, who knows, right? Tim said, "Oh, well, wait, hold on." Pete Richardson says that BJJ helps your mobility. Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. So it's got to be something in the way that these guys train it, right? Um, Tim says Inosano is still doing BJJ at 89. And yes, Haja Machado has yoga jujitsu based on gymnastique naturale, which was taught to his father and uncle, right? I've done it with him. It's great restorative stuff. Yeah, right. Okay, yeah. And I heard about Hadra Machado's yoga thing, oh man, decades ago, right? Joe Ferris says, we have a remedy for feeling old when training in later years over an island. It's called Guinness. Well, Joe, I'll let you know that a pint of Guinness is a staple for these old guys in Miami when we finish training on Sunday mornings. Okay. So, yes, I'm with you on that. That is part of our remedial efforts, also. Right. Um, Kwaku says that BJJ help girls back, but I believe what he was doing with John Jack Machado was a BJJ yoga hybrid. Right, yeah, because Jean Jacques and Hodge are being brothers, right? I'm sure because I heard Kwaku that Sifu Dan used to train with all of them. He trained with John, not Carlos so much because Carlos was in Texas, and now I think John is in Texas too. But Higgin and I think Sifu Dan spent the most time with John Jack, but he trained with all of them, including Hodger. I think yoga jitsu was like a weekly thing for him at one point, and maybe even more than once a week. I think, right? Um, Tim says they probably use a local dialect word for empty hands, right? Suntakan or Panantukan or Pangamut or one of the hundred others, right? Um, yeah, if you see Jason and I ask him, he prefers Eskrima for weapons and he's well versed in empty hands. And now I'm trying to remember in Sifu Dan's Filipino martial arts book if it was Inai that he said was well versed in disarms. Anyhow, that's just a thought, right? Okay. Okay, so Mark, we get back to your payong or umbrella for training, just to do, but knowing nothing about it. So Mark had asked the question about a high level coach under me. Would you have to know at least two um, umbrellas? So I guess he meant umbrellas. So now it's payong or umbrella for training, just to do, but know nothing about it. Well, you can never be a high level coach under me. Not you specifically. No one could ever be a high level coach under me and just be training, just to do, but know nothing about what they're training. Mark, wouldn't work. The term mano apito is used for empty hands. Mano apito. You know, Renee, I never trust you with anything. The term mono apito, I'm gonna have to look that up, right? Okay, Red Tiger says he's got to run. um, Mick says, I remember looking at yoga with my wife around lockdown times. She taught yoga, I taught BJJ, but at that time in northern UK we both said yoga would be a hard sell, no matter how good it was. ah to the tough wrestling and BJJ gyms in Yorkshire and Lancashire, so we never acted on it. Before you know it, a good few were advertising yoga for BJJ. Yeah, yeah. I think they go hand in hand for damn sure, right? Frank says, did you hear about the incident involving Rampage? Oh yeah, Raja Jackson. Yeah, he badly beat up a pro wrestler, and now guys in the MMA community are feuding with each other on opposite sides of the issue. Yeah, I did see a report on that, Frank. And what I saw was the wrestler made a mistake because he thought, I forget what the term is that they use. Not It's not on the job. I think it's that I think the term is that you were working. Apparently, he thought that Raja was in the in the loop and following the script or something, right? When he hit him with the can, which and then they apologized, and then um, they told Raja that he could get his licks in, as in you could get your revenge when you go in the ring, because now they'll be working off an idea. But then he just went crazy on the guy, which I don't think is right. I mean, if the guy thought that you were in the loop and he made a mistake and then he apologizes for it, then when you get in the ring where you're supposed to now do the work, then you don't go off on the guy and knock him senseless and then beat the crap out of him while he's unconscious. Yeah, that ain't gentlemanly at all, right? Right. Um, Magazine Retriever says that Hickson Gracie was the first to implement yoga, and Simon says it would be a kick, but applied with simplicity, efficiency, directness, non-telegraphic, etc., kind of changes it a bit. But Simon, let's say that you have a Thai boxer, right, who trains to kick simply, efficiently, directly, and in a non-telegraphic way. Is that now a Jeet Kune kick, a Bruce Lee kick, because it's applied with simplicity, efficiency, directness, and non telegraphicness? See, because here's what I'm asking: does Jeet Kune Do own simplicity, efficiency, directness, and non telegraphicness? Is that possible? That nobody else, the only people who train to kick simply are Jeet Kune Do people. The only people who train to kick efficiently are Jeet Kune Do people. The only people who train to kick direct with directness or in a non-telegraphic manner are Jeet Kune Do people. Is that what's going on? I don't know. Right? Magazine says Psycho Stu, right, crushed the beer can and apologized. Then Raja got rage baited. Oh my God, man, you guys got the terms and everything, right? Um, then Raja got rage baited by his online followers and acted out in the ring. Yeah. Well, then he's not a quite smart guy. And Simon says it's a very efficient Thai boxing kick. No, it doesn't own it. It stresses it. Yeah. Well, okay. So then the follow on question to that, Simon, then is it only Jeet Kune Do that stresses simplicity, directness, efficiency, non-telegraphicness, and what have you? Is it only Jeet Kune Do? Does Jeet Kune Do own that stuff? Nobody else stresses that, right? Mark says, "Thank you. I need to work on my grammar." I'm Mark with a name like Mark Goulet. I'm not even sure if English is your first language, so my apologies, right? If because I saw your name and I thought, I wonder. Okay, so yeah, don't mind me too much when I go off on stuff like that, right? Okay, so there's nothing in the queue, so I'm gonna go to stuff that was sent in, and so here was the question: what do you think Bruce Lee meant by let the name Jeet Kune Do be wiped out? Okay, so I'm gonna be a little bit sacrilegious here, right? Because I don't think that Bruce Lee ever thought of Jeet Kune Do as the answer to everything. I don't think Bruce Lee ever got to that point. And I think he was smart enough to figure out that it's possible for somebody to be training in one thing and then come across something else that radically affects his training. And so if you come across something and it radically affects your training, then there's no need for you to cling to the name Jeet Kune Do. You could just do what you do and not even have to give it a name. You know what I mean? Now, for any kind of reason, any number of reasons, you could want to stay identified with something, or you could decide to become identified with the other thing. So in that case, the name of Jeet Kune Do, it's not wiped out. It just disappears. It dissolves, and then you're just doing what you're doing. It's like Cass Magda told me that at one point, if you were really Jeet Kune Do, you never even talked about it. So Daniel Lee, for example, Daniel Lee, until like the nucleus time and then the magazines invited those guys to come out and what have you. Um, um, Daniel Lee's Jeet Kune Do disappeared into his Tai Chi, right? I think to a certain degree, it could be said that Steve Golden's JKD disappeared into Wing Chun, right? Or something like that. That I'm not too sure about, right? So that's part of the whole let the name of Jeet Kune be wiped out. But again, I wish I knew as much about origin sources for anything that Bruce Lee said as does James Bishop. Because if I could just immediately point to, oh, when Bruce Lee said, then let the name Jeet Kune be wiped out, it comes from this. And this guy was saying, let the whatever be wiped out. And that's where Bruce Lee took it from. And when you understand that, when you understand that so much of what Bruce Lee made notes on or whatever is derivative, it kind of gives you a different take on the instructions of Jeet Kune Do, because you're like, oh, well, he liked how this saying sounded. So he made a note of it. And now he's dead and gone, and his followers are twisting themselves into knots, trying to find a way to apply his philosophical utterances, well, not even utterances, his philosophical scribblings into their physical practice. And maybe sometimes it works, and maybe at other times it doesn't work. So maybe the thing about now that I have truly understood the art, a kick is just a kick. Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe you're supposed to stay, unless what that means is that now I have trained my kick so well that now I just kick. Now I don't have to think about, I used to kick this way, then I stopped training kicking that way, and I started kicking a different way. And now when I kick, I just kick. That's what we're talking about. Yeah, I'm with you. But who's to say, right? It doesn't mean that you now go to the point where, well, any kick is a kick, right? Nah, not really. Not really. There's sometimes there's better ways of doing what you're doing. Right. I lost it again. We were talking about okay. Wing Chun stresses efficient, direct, and I guess you mean effective, right? Okay, but what does that mean, Simon? Um, did Bruce Lee take the idea of being efficient, direct, and effective from Wing Chun? But Troy Lefoot doesn't stress being efficient or direct, right? Again, I don't know. I don't know, because if we line up 10 martial artists from 10 different arts, right? And we ask them, in training your art, do you emphasize or ignore being efficient and direct? Is being efficient and being direct important when training your art? I don't think any of the 10 would say, no, it's not important. So there's no way that Jeet Kune Do or Wing Chun can own efficient and direct. I think everybody trains to be efficient and direct. If anybody was to ask me, that's what I would say, right? Tim Becker wants to know, can non-telegraphic and ABD coexist? Bruce Lee talked about being able to read intention. If this is the case and that is trainable, there's no such thing as non-telegraphic. Well, ABD So we gotta distinguish now, right? Okay, because a lot of times the way ABD is presented is that you, for example, drop your hand from the high line, from the high carry position to a low carry position to draw the attack towards that now apparently exposed area, and then you counterattack, right? So you're not telegraphing anything. If we limit non telegraphic to your delivery of your stuff, okay? Because remember, Bruce Lee was talking about, people who would pull the hand back and then throw the fist forward and what have you. So he considered that type of stuff to be telegraphic. So he wanted to get away from that. But I don't see how trying to perform your techniques, your attacks in a non-telegraphic way is commensurate with trying to use the tactic of attack by drawing. If we're talking about attack by drawing being exposing a target to draw the person's attack, to my simple way of thinking, simple minded way of thinking, I'm not telegraphing anything. But Tim talked about telegraphing, Bruce Lee talked about reading intention. So if now I'm supposed to put myself on the receiving end of somebody intending to draw me in, then yes, that person is telegraphing his or her intention. So I guess we gotta talk about this um, non-telegraphic or this intention thing, Tim, in terms of giving or receiving, right? Is it hatag or dawat? Because if it's me giving, I don't want to be telegraphic. But if it's me trying to draw a guy in, I have to be telegraphic in order to do that. I have to telegraph to him that there's an opening that he could try to fill. But now, if we're talking about reading a guy's intention, so now I read what he's telegraphing. You see what I'm saying? Oh, Tim, we're gonna have a good time with this. Remind me to have this mini discussion with you next month when Ron Reagan and I come out for the weekend workshops. Oh, this will be fun. We'll dive more deeply into this, right? Yeah, right. Yeah, Tim says I have to say I love the paradoxes and duality of this JKD thing. So do I, right? Simon says Wing Chun stresses it as well, but if you're doing JKD, then try to stick with the principles. Yeah, for sure. Right. Tim says, I agree. Bruce Lee never intended JKD to be the answer to everything. I think he meant for it to be a way to explore possible answers for anything. Yeah, I would say that his philosophical musings and what have you, that he would have wanted the principles of Jeet Kune to not be limited to just physical expression. That he'd want him to be, he'd want his thing to be more well rounded than that, for sure. Yeah. Sean Snow says, I always interpret it as Jeet Kune was a means to an end for Bruce and not an end in and of itself. And that means to an end those ends could be quite varied, couldn't they? Right, Sean? Yeah. Simon says it confuses the shit out of me often. Simon, you and I belong to the same club. Right? Okay. Todd, please put in the comments the phonetic pronunciation of your last name, because I looked at it again, and what is it? Is it Kunick? Kuniki? Because I used to call Tim Becker Tim Bescherer, right? And when he's not around, right? Like Ronnie and I, if we're talking, we'll slip into calling Tim, never to his face, right? I mean, you got to respect the guy. But when Ronnie and I did, we go, oh yeah, Tim Bashara. This because I like the name Bashara, but it's not my name, right? So Todd, please tell me what is the correct, but you got to do it phonetically. What is the correct pronunciation of your name? Because it's a real interesting. I think I want to say it's Kuneki, but it's probably Kunuk. What do I know? Anyhow, right? I got a question. Watching one of Sifu Chris Kent's videos, and he was explaining about when the JKD nucleus was starting, and Guru Inasano gave a note to Sifu Hartzell to read to the nucleus about him not joining the group. Is that why the nucleus broke up? No, and didn't last. Because we need the nucleus now more than ever, in my opinion. I realize most of the original students have passed away. Okay, well, then my question for you, Todd, is why do you say we need the nucleus more than ever now, right? Especially since when we had them, what was achieved when we had them? So I would ask you that, right? Um, and since most of the original nucleus members have passed away, who's going to form this new nucleus? Okay, but in terms of Inasano given a note, I've said this before. When they were thinking of starting a new Jeet Kune organization, right? Nucleus, foundation, educational foundation, estate, well, not estate, right? Um, they could have asked me, and I could have told them that Dan Inasano would never be a member, right? Because remember, Bruce Lee himself said something about Jeet Kune Do is not an organization of which one can be a member. I think more than anybody else, Dan Inosanto is the one who takes that stuff to heart. Okay, and so, um, and again, this is just my opinion. He would go through the motions of it. Is like we're having a meeting, right? So okay, we show up to the meeting, but then ultimately, um, it, if he was going to be a part of it, it would have to be like in a way where he really didn't have to do anything, right? Um, so, but I don't think that because the nucleus didn't break up as soon as Larry Hartzell read a letter, right? Because it was around for what, 5 years or so. I don't have the timeline, so no, but I don't think that Inasano no, Inasano not being a member didn't have anything to do with it at all. But I really want to know, Todd, why you think we would need the nucleus now, and to quote your words, more than ever. Right? Tim's given James Bishop ideas, an online database that I could type in part of a quote and get the reference. Yeah, at the speed of my internet, which is wicked fast, Tim. Right? Sean says Tim, I think if you fall for the ABD, then it is non-telegraphic because the attack comes as a surprise. Wait, Sean, if I fall for the ABD, then that means that I fell for the opening that the guy presented. So then my attack comes as a surprise because you saw the opening, and by the time you realize that opening was a Wile E. Coyote tunnel, it's too late. Who falls for the opening? Me? If a guy tries to work ABD on me, I fall for the opening because the attack comes as a surprise. So he sets up for me to lead to work an entry against him, but it still comes as a surprise. I'm confused. Sean, you gotta straighten me out on that one. All right. I know that Sifu Dan studied Bondo, Frank Nordquist says. Did he ever teach you any Bondo techniques? We were in Tulsa. It's either 1989 or 1991, right? But did he ever teach any Bondo techniques? Not me. No, never taught me any Bondo techniques. I'm trying to think if he ever really did teach any Bondo at any time. Tim Becker might know this, right? But I can't recall Sifu Dan ever like putting into his seminar presentation system stuff specifically from Bondo. I don't remember that. I know I had some Bondo T-shirts. I remember that, right? But no, I don't. I don't recall him ever teaching specifically Bondo stuff. Simon says no one owns it, but if you're doing JKD, then it should be stressed. Well, it should be stressed because being direct and efficient, everybody should train that. So again, see Simon, you see Simon, this is why you and I belong to the same confused club. If everybody is being direct and efficient, then is everybody Jeet Kune? You see? Terry Valla says the trouble with Wing Chun fighting stance, it isn't efficient now, even though the tools are. So the tools of Wing Chun are efficient, but their delivery system is not efficient. So how do Wing Chun people deliver these effective tools, these efficient tools? Because their fighting stance is not. So in the history of Wing Chun, nobody has sought to make their fighting stance efficient. They're all happy with an efficient and I'm sorry, with an inefficient fighting stance, but their tools are efficient. Terry, I don't see how that could be. It can be efficient if it's a self-protection situation. If it's sparring, then I agree. So, okay, I have to interpret what you guys are talking about because they're not questions for me. So, um, I guess Simon is saying that to follow up with Terry that the Wing Chun fighting stance, if it's for sparring, then it's inefficient. But if you're trying to de-escalate with a fence up, then it's very valid. Are you guys talking like door work in the United Kingdom and what have you? Is that what's going on here? Right? Right? Tim says, hell yeah, over Indian food in September. Yes, sir. Right? And Todd says, it's Kentucky. Isn't that, what did I say? I said Kaneki. So I was almost there. Kentucky. Thank you very much, Todd. I love that name. Right? And Tim says in Paris, they called him Bashara. They called him Bashara. Well, Tim, I'll tell you this, right? It was only yeah, let's see. So I had a Chinese friend growing up in Barbados, and for him, my name had four syllables, right? Dwight. And then in 1980, I was hanging out with this real Southern guy from Georgia, and that's when I found out that not four syllables as in Dwight, but three syllables as in Dwight, right? So, yeah, Bashara. Yeah, I think Bashara is cuter. Right? Okay, so Terry and Simon are having their discussion about Wing Chun and arm position and all that stuff, and that's cool, right? Simon says, "I think the JKD Dialogues is a far more efficient platform than the Nucleus platform." That's a good one, Simon. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Right? Eric G says, in my opinion, JKD will be forever evolving, and original versus concepts will be forever divided. Why doesn't the original camp understand the evolution basis of JKD? Um, well, that's it right there. Your first, the first part, your first sentence answers the question asked in your second sentence. Okay, they'll be forever divided because of their approach to understanding things. One group understands it this way, other group understands it this way. For me, right, since I think that the whole debate between original and concepts is ridiculous, what I've asked people to do, and I'm keeping my eye on the clock, even though I said we don't have any time limitations. I don't want you guys to be spending, you know, your whole evening with me. You got other things that you could be doing. But I asked recently, you know what? Let me just go into it right now. I asked recently for people to, um, and I asked it of people that you could consider to be, let me gather this. I asked people for a definition of Jeet Kune Do concepts. In fact, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it right now. So somebody, anybody, everybody, whoever, give me your definition of Jeet Kune Do concepts in the comments right now. I'll wait a few minutes, right? But tell me what Jeet Kune Do concepts is, and then maybe we'll make that the last part of tonight's discussion, right? But we can't ask. Nobody can ask the original camp to understand the evolutionary basis of Jeet Kune Do, because I bet you that if you ask them, just like the thing about efficient and direct, I guarantee you, if you get a bunch of people who practice original Jeet Kune Do and you ask them, how in your mind does the art evolve? None of them are going to say, no, Jeet Kune Do does not evolve. We train in an art that is dead. We do not train a living art in which there is room to evolve. We train only uh, what Bruce did, the way Bruce did it. Nothing but that. Only that. We don't keep up with changes to in fitness or in strength training, mobility training, any of that stuff. No, it's 1967 or nothing. I don't think you would find anybody making that claim. So for original JKDers, the art evolves. Maybe their answer would be more along the lines of, by continually training in the art, the person evolves naturally and automatically. You see? So they would have an answer for you in terms of evolution, right? Their answer would be more along the lines of, the art doesn't evolve, the person evolves through training in the art. I can't believe I just came up with that. I might have to I might have to write that down. You know how in law school they make you argue against yourself? I might have to write that down and come up with my argument against that. Yes. Thank you, Eric. That was that was quite the intellectual exercise. Right? Okay. All right. So, hey, Joseph Sanzone. Okay, so Koshe says, if the nucleus were to continue, it would only make sense if they were to run if they were to run by if it were to run by the students of the students. In other words, the second generation. When the nucleus was created, there were already a couple second generations. Well, yeah, it could that's the only people who, because it's only the second generation people that are keeping the art alive right now. I mean, Steve Golden, Dan Asano, Patrick Strong. I think, or is there anybody beyond them that's still out there who was around when Bruce Lee was around? I don't know. So yeah, it would have to be run by the students of the students. Um, okay, that's Simon. Okay, so Todd says, "Oh man, another long one." Well, at least we had the JKD Nucleus magazine. Do you think that having an organization would hurt JKD? We talked about this last week, Todd. Um, Individual JKD people will have their own organizations. And then if a set of guys said, you know what, I feel like I'm very aligned with you and you're thinking about it, and then two leaders of two organizations decided to come together and form a single organization. That could happen. But if you're talking about everybody in the JKD world ever deciding, yes, just one organization to rule them all, right? That ain't happening. So, no, right? And Todd says, I personally feel that JKD, or at least Jun Fan, is dying. Most of the big names in JKD. Okay, so so this is a carry on from last week, right? Most of the big names in JKD. So how are they big names in JKD? You see, I think, Todd, this is where um, dare I say, this is where your affections are misplaced. Because you said most of the big names in JKD do not teach Jun Fan. They have more moved to Thai and BJJ. So how are they big names in JKD? See, they're not. They're not. Now, the reason why, and I will attempt to speak for you now, Todd, the reason why you're saying that they're big names in JKD is because you know their origins. So, Eric Paulson, Greg Nelson, let's take those two. You might be referring to people like them and calling them big names in JKD. I wouldn't. If you ask me for big names in JKD, I would say Tommy Carruthers, Richard Torres, Joaquin Marcelo, um, um, oh shoot, um, Javier. Geez, man, I was calling him Oliver, right? Javier, get it right. Joaquin Marcelo, Javier Quintero, right? Um, Mike Gittleson, Rodney Hitchcock. Um, did I say Harinder Singh? Right? Um, people like that. They are big names in JKD. And what are they known for? They're known for JKD. Paul Vunak is still around, right? These are big names in JKD. Burton Richardson is a big name in JKD. I mean, it's right there in the name of his company, JKD Unlimited. And what are they known for, right? Well, Bert is known for a lot of weaponry stuff and for BJJ too, right? But the reason why, Todd, because I think I know where you're coming from. The reason why you're calling them big names in Jeet Kune Do is because you know that most of these people have a connection to Dan Inosanto for the most part. In Joaquin Marcelo's case, to Ted Wong. In It is Javier Quintero. I mean, I know I have the last name Quintero right, right? It is Javier. Oh shoot! If it isn't, I apologize. Right? But it's not Oliver Quintero. I know it's not that. I'm pretty sure it's Javier. Right? Through Jerry Poteet. Okay. And well, since we're talking about Jerry Poteet, Eric Carr is a big name in Jeet Kune Do. Fran Poteet Joseph, another big name in Jeet Kune Do. So all the big names in Jeet Kune Do are known for Jeet Kune Do. Eric Paulson and and Greg Nelson are well known in the BJJ and MMA world, better known than they are in JKD. So I wouldn't consider them to be big names in Jeet Kune Do. Now, they are my Jeet Kune Do seniors because, well, no, not Eric. I think Eric is junior to me, but Greg is definitely senior to me. I could be wrong, right? Um, but no, to be known as a Jeet Kune Do torch bearer, no, those guys went beyond that a long, long time ago because, we were talking earlier about how Daniel Lee, for example, his Jeet Kune Do disappeared into Tai Chi. Okay. Well, for people like Eric and Greg, Jeet Kune Do has been totally integrated into what they do and what they are known and what they're known for. So for them, they are part of the phenomenon that I refer to as the invisibility of Jeet Kune Do. Okay, Eric Paulson's creativity, Eric Paulson's if you watch some of the stuff that he does in grappling, okay, you can see that he's using simplicity and directness. You don't doubt his effectiveness for a minute, but you can see that he's using simplicity and directness. But it doesn't look like anything that you saw Bruce Lee do on the screen, and it doesn't look like anything that was reported by, let's say, Bob Bremer, that Bruce Lee did in class, in training, or even by Dan Inosanto or by Ted Wong or any of those people. Okay, so but it's integrated. I wouldn't agree with you that it's been abandoned. I think it's been integrated. So to continue with what you said here, I do think JKD will die. I've never seen 20-year-olds doing JKD. That's not true. That's not true. Because there are 20-year-old people training at Clay, training with Clay and Beverly Pratka, right? There are 20-year-olds training with Joaquin Marcelo. Okay. There are probably some younger people training with Eric Carr. So I think there are 20 somethings out there training in Jeet Kune Do still, right? I see that Simo Cookie. You guys should look into to that term. Has some younger students, but in my opinion, not enough. Well, I don't know. Have you seen all her students? I've never seen. Right. I would guess most in JKD are 40 and older. Okay, so now you're on to something, right? Now you're on to something because in Dallas last weekend, let me take this down. In Dallas last weekend, um, if I remember correctly, Ronnie Reagan, if you're still around, correct me on this. The largest group was ages 40 to 50. That was the largest group in attendance, right? And a lot of those people are have been students of Dan Inosanto for 20 years. Okay. So I will agree with you that the demographics for Jeet Kune Do, at least on the seminar circuit, seem to skewer, is skewer the word? Skew, seem to skew older. But if you have a guy who's 40 something years old at an Inosanto seminar, but he teaches, when he goes back home, do you think he's teaching 40 something year olds mostly? Or might he be teaching 20 something year olds? Okay. Um, you see, so I think, Todd, what it is, there are a lot of people out there in the world of Jeet Kune Do that we're not aware of. You see, so we're aware of to use your phrase, the big names, and so if we see video of them, we go, oh, well, look, Eric Paulson and Greg Nelson, they're not emphasizing the Jeet Kune Do, but they're big names in Jeet Kune Do. No, they have not been big names in Jeet Kune Do for a long, long time because they have evolved in a direction that does not, on the surface and visibly, emphasize what is recognized as Jeet Kune Do and what have you. And why is that? Well, it's because they spend a lot of time in the world of BJJ and the world of MMA. So you're not going to see them actively training and teaching Pin Choi Pak Sao Gua Choi, right? You might not even see Joaquin Marcelo teaching that because Pin Choi Pak Sao Gua Choi was not part of late stage JKD with Ted Wong. You'll see Tim Becker teach it. You'll see Harinder Singh teach it. You'll see Javier Quintero teach it. because it's part of their thing. Eric Carr, probably. Tommy Carruthers, you will not see teach it because I don't think that they do any of the trapping stuff, right? And I'm just telling you this, Todd, because it distresses me a little bit when I hear people talk about how Jeet Kune Do is dying, Jeet Kune Do is dying, Jeet Kune Do is dying. Well, one of my questions is, well, okay, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? Are you in a position to do something to keep it alive, to resuscitate it, to whatever, whatever, right? And I don't think that it helps to 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 wake up every day, and I'm not talking about you, Todd, specifically, but I just don't think that it helps to have this idea that this thing to which we're also dedicated and devoted and committed, that it's on its last legs. Because if it is, then if we can't do anything to fix that, then we need to go somewhere else. We got to find something else to do, right? Anyhow, I've been raving on that for too long, right? Tim says, good question on the Bondo. He's had three different teachers that I know of. We've had them all at the academy, but I don't recall ever teaching us Bondo himself. Um, One caveat is that Bondo does contain parts of Litway, which does find its way into parts of our SEMA classes and Majapahit Silat. Okay. Yeah. All right. Cool. Simon says we're not trying to hijack the show with our English doorway vocabulary. I knew it. I knew that's what you guys were talking about, right? That's fine, Simon. You and Terry are not the guys who irk me when that happens. Not at all. That's fine, right? Um, Tim says it's the spice of life. I enjoy the different pronunciations, right? Um, okay, Terry says to clarify what I meant. Is the Wing Chun fighting stance efficient in this time with MMA combat sports? Well, you mean okay? So if you're talking about if it's Wing Chun going up against MMA and combat sports, I hope there's somebody in Wing Chun who could pull it off. I have not seen that because MMA and combat sports seem to be a little bit more mobile, right? But what's the context? See, because if it's a Wing Chun guy who's going to step into the MMA ring, right, and work against a, an MMAer, right, a guy with kickboxing and grappling skills, those are two different types of rhythms. Okay, those rhythms they don't work. So one guy he better have been able, right? He better have prepared, right, for that. But in the context of, no, I don't want to sound like one of these. Oh well, there's the sport context, and then there's the street context, and what have you. I would say if the Wing Chun person is not used to the rhythm of, let's just make it easy, of kickboxing, right? Then he's going to have a hard time. If what he's used to is like Wing Chun versus Wing Chun, he's going to have a hard time because the MMAers don't fight like that. So unless he has done something to prepare himself, right, for what is out there, he's going to be in trouble. So in that way, the fighting stance of Wing Chun would not be efficient in this time of day. Yeah, right. Simon said, is it using the principles and guidelines to find similarities between arts, etc.? Yeah. Scorch says, Jeet Kune Do concepts. Okay. Yeah, I had asked the question, right? A definition of Jeet Kune Do concepts, right? So it is using the principles and guidelines to find similarities between arts, etc. Okay, yeah, right. That one I would go with, and that's a much better job than the so-called JKD authority, right? Did Simon? Thank you. Scort says Jeet Kune Do concepts is the unabridged version of Jeet Kune Do, right? Tim says for me, and I've never asked Sifu Dan, so this is just my interpretation. JKD concepts is taking the mindset as to how we train and applying it to other martial arts. For this reason, it's why you have the same type of detractors who get on him in JKD that you have in the FMA world and in the CLAT world, and probably some of the martial arts. I don't see detractors in the Southeast arts against him. They regularly get together and compete and punch each other. Jeet Kune Do concepts, okay. Um, Dell says Jeet Kune Do concepts is the expanded version. So we have the unabridged version and we have the expanded version. And Tim says it's how we train, taking the mindset as to how we train JKD and applying it to other martial arts. Okay. Okay. Right. Um, Terry says, I look at JKD concepts as to learn the material of 1973. The material of 1973. What is that? Then train it, spar it, research your own struggles, and find a solution by looking at solutions in Junfan and outside, including fitness and nutrition. Okay. And Magazine Retriever says Jeet Kune Do concepts is Jeet Kune Do Unlimited. Frank says Jeet Kune Do concepts is Jeet Kune Do tailored to the needs of the individual practitioner. Hmm. Sean says, thank you, Tim, for typing this out. So I didn't have to, right? Okay. Right. Okay. All right. So let's deal with this JKD concepts. So I thought I had it with me already open, but I didn't. So give me a second while I try to find this thing. Yeah, there we go. Okay. All right. So listen to this. Right. Listen to this. JKD concepts. JKD concepts is what Dan Asano invented to further promote his cultural arts of Kali and Eskrima, which he called the 26 arts of Jeet Kune Do. Now, this is one of the most incredible things that I have ever heard, right? Dan Asano invented JKD concepts to promote his cultural arts of Kali and Eskrima, which he called the 26 arts of Jeet Kune Do. Now, what's funny is that this list of 26 arts doesn't have anything to do with Kali and Eskrima. So, how in heaven's name could Inasano be promoting Kali and Eskrima in Jeet Kune Do concepts, calling it the 26 arts of Jeet Kune Do, when Kali and Eskrima are not included? Now, I never heard Dan Inasano talk anything about Jeet Kune Do being a composite of 26 different arts, right? I know that the thing about 26 arts exists in Paul Vunak's book, and I know that there's video of Larry Hartzell talking about 26 arts. And my understanding is that the source of this material is a list of things. We talked about Jesse Glover earlier on in the evening, and there's a list of things that Jesse Glover mentioned, arts that Bruce Lee had looked into, um, arts that Bruce Lee had bought books at some Vancouver bookstore. And when you add them up, right, when you add up, and maybe Inosano talked about it also, but apparently when you add up what Inosano referenced, but what mostly uh, Jesse Glover referenced, if you add those up, it's like 26. But I never heard Dan Inosano say, and these 26 arts go to make up Jeet Kune Do. So to say that Inosano created Jeet Kune Do concepts, which he called, and to promote Kali and Eskrima, which he called the 26 arts of JKD, well, it doesn't even make sense grammatically, right? Apart from just being like ridiculous. Okay. So, um, so apparently this had something to do with the formation of the nucleus, which we talked about earlier also. But I don't think this is true. Now, this is what this guy is saying, but I don't think this is true at all. That although I know that there were articles on Inosano that were presented, and anyhow, it's just ridiculous to say that Inosano created Jeet Kune Do concepts to promote 26 arts of Jeet Kune Do and promote Kali and Eskrima. Right? That's ridiculous. That is the most ridiculous thing that I have heard. But when you check the source, it's not that it's not that surprising, right? So to get back to what you guys were saying, your definitions of Jeet Kune Do concepts, okay? If Jeet Kune Do translates to mean the way of the intercepting fist, right? Okay. So, like Tim was saying, so if that's how and what you train in JKD, right? The art of interception. And then you go and you look at Filipino martial arts, Filipino weaponry. And the reason why you're training in Filipino weaponry is because you're thinking, well, if interception is good in empty hands, wouldn't interception also be good in weaponry? And then let's say you have an interest in boxe française savate because you like how they how they because again, Bruce Lee talked about how like the saboteurs that they fence with the feet. So let's say you're into that. Then when you study boxe française, you're going to study it with a viewpoint towards, do they have interception methods already in boxe française, or is there an interception guideline that I can follow, that I can apply in boxe française? Then you do the same thing with Muay Thai, and you do the same thing with Penjak Silat or what have you. And that's just one. I'm just saying, I'm just using the idea of interception. Okay. Because now, what if in looking at another art, you find that they prioritize interception in their own way? Well, then that's an idea that they have in common with Jeet Kune. So it would probably behoove you to get involved with what those guys are doing. That's Jeet Kune concepts. You see? So it's not to take another art wholesale and train it wholesaledly the way people who train in that art just in that art, the way, right? So they're not influenced by anything else in the way they train that art. As JKD people, we are influenced. Anything else it is that we go train, we are influenced by the JKD mindset. You see? So that's where the idea, as expressed by Bruce Lee, that you don't want to become a boxer, but you do want to understand the high points and the low points, the strengths and the weaknesses of boxing, right? You also want to learn how to counter boxing. Now, what's one of the best ways? Actually, this is something that I'm gonna tell you guys now, but this is something that I'm working on for an upcoming issue of the I Love Jeet Kune Do broadcast. Which doesn't mean that because I say it now that you shouldn't tune in for that, a couple Wednesdays from now. Okay, um, but use your common sense. What's one of the best ways to learn how to counter Brazilian Jiu Jitsu? Look at some tapes of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu or get on the mat with Jiu Jitsu people and learn from them what their top counters are within their art. What's the better way? Oh, I could just look at it and I could tell how to counter it. Or go study with them. But you go study with them because you have an express purpose. The express purpose is to learn. What are the strengths of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu? What are the weaknesses of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu? Because I don't intend to become a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu guy. And what if I was to find out, right, that to really get an understanding and an ability, a functional ability in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, what if I was to find out, I'm making this up, that it took about 4 years, right? So that you're like a high blue belt, or maybe you just got a purple belt or whatever, right? What if at that point, as a JKD person, you're like, okay, that's it. I feel like, or maybe not, maybe it takes you a less amount of time. But when you feel like I got the working knowledge of how to train the arts technique, how to train the arts technique functionally, how to counter the arts techniques using the arts techniques, how to counter the counter of the arts techniques with the arts techniques. And I feel like I gotten there. And I've proved it because in training, in studying this art, I'm able to pull stuff off to a level with which I am happy. Now it's time for me to get out, so to speak. Now, what if I'm having a great time and I got the wherewithal to continue studying it? Then I continue studying in it, you know, right? Okay. It doesn't have to replace what I was doing, but I kind of modify my original intention. My original intention was to get to a level of functionality with which I was happy, and then get out. But then I decided to stay, right? I have just used the Jeet Kune Do concept to guide my training in this art because I'm not in it to become it. I want to know the high points and the low points. Because then, see, because along the way, studying how to counter an art with the techniques of that art, you know what I might come across also? How to counter the techniques of that art with techniques from another art. And it might not even be arts specifically, right? I might learn how to counter grappling, okay, with trapping. I might learn how to counter trapping with grappling. Oh, and then there's two other skills of empty-handed combat. So I might learn, right? So we take those four. I don't know the math, but I think if you go 4 by 4, there'd be 16 ways, right? How to counter kicking, how to counter kicking with punching, how to counter kicking with trapping, how to counter kicking with grappling, and then you go to punching, how to counter punching with kicking, punch with punching. Now, people who know about double stick realize where I'm going with this. So they understand why it's 16 basics, right? That's Jeet Kune Do concept training. You see? Okay. Now, I really want you guys to analyze that and give me feedback on what I just told you. Okay. Because we're going on 2 hours and 15 minutes, right? So Cesar says, instead of Jeet Kune Do versus Jeet Kune Do concepts, or let me put this up. Instead of Jeet Kune Do versus Jeet Kune Do concepts, or Bruce Lee versus Mike Tyson, Cesar, you spend too much time on the internet. What is the unspoken issue in JKD that should be analyzed more? I don't know if there's any unspoken issues in JKD. Oh, no. I just talked about one. I just analyzed one. Okay. The unspoken issue. What exactly is actually it's two issues in one. What exactly is original Jeet Kune Do? What exactly is Jeet Kune Do concepts? But then we would be not to argue, right? Not to argue about which one is better or closer, right? No, it'd be a different approach, right? Analyze them to see what they have in common. But I think in order to do that, people would first have to understand what Jeet Kune Do concepts training is supposed to be like. That's what I think. If anybody was to ask me, that's what I would say, right? But they never ask me stuff like that. Okay. Um, Todd says Paulson and Nelson were big influences to me. Just disappointed is all. Yeah. Well, yeah, I could dig that. Um, Tim, that's a big comment again. So let me see if I can extract because I'm just gonna go for like another 15 minutes or so. Indicate the basic. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so let me show you guys what Tim put. Um, Problem with the idea of any organization is the concept of rule them all. Right? Yes. Right. If there was an organization that was more of a thing that bonded different people from different camps, I don't know how many people from different camps are interested in bonding with different people from different camps. I don't know. I don't know. Um, I don't know how many people. I know that there are people, right? I mean, it's like I'm an example of that. If not to toot my own horn, but I will dialogue with people who are not Inasano students. I would even dialogue with people who think that Inasano is terrible because I'd love to hear why they think that. Because I find that stuff fascinating, right? I find it fascinating that there are people like a lot of us who think that Bruce Lee was great, and then there are people who are like Bruce Lee sucked, right? I love the fact that human beings are capable of widely divergent points of view, right? Because to me, it's like, oh man, let me find out why this guy thinks this way in case I'm missing something. And then if the guy's real smart and he can say, oh, well, Dwight, here's what you're missing. And I go, wow, you're an idiot. Or I go, wow, I never thought of it that way. So I don't know. I know that there are people out there. What I think, kind of riffing off what Todd said, what would disappoint me is, Tim, is that there's not enough people. There's not enough people from the different camps that are interested in bonding, to use your word, with different people or with people from the other camps. And I don't think that there are, right? Um, and that's potentially, like you say, that's probably the only way that it would work out. But no, people are interested in who's right and who's wrong, right? Do y'all know who wrote that song? Who's right, who's wrong, and which one is the best version, right? Simon says New York Martial Arts Academy do JKD very well. Hundreds of students train in very modern way, tons of sparring. JKD is alive in some places. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Right? Todd says, I thought Paulson was going to take over Hartzell's JKD trap into grappling. I guess I'm just being selfish. They can walk their own path. Nah, Todd, it's okay to be disappointed in your heroes. I mean, I could see that, right? But here's the thing, right? Here's the thing. Who was I talking to about this? Ron Reagan. Ronnie Reagan and I were talking because we had a long time at the airport in Dallas, because he's a fantastic travel agent. I'm just a better travel agent. So we had a long time at the gate in Dallas last weekend, and so we were talking about this. And I asked him. I go, Ronnie, did you wrestle at school as a kid? Yes, because this is the thing. I always wondered about the phenomenon. Why is it that when Hoist Gracie beat everybody in UFC one, why is it that that thing caught on like wildfire? And I think it's because, now, I didn't grow up in the States, but it seems as if wrestling in high school, right? I don't know if it's in elementary school also or whatever, but it seems as if in America, wrestling is a thing that guys do, just like basketball and football and what's the other one? Baseball. The one that's frantic cricket, right? See, but not where I grew up. Where I grew up, wrestling was not a thing, not at all. So it didn't surprise me once I analyzed it. It didn't surprise me that this form of wrestling, known as Gracie Jiu Jitsu or Brazilian Jiu Jitsu or whatever, that it became popular overnight. Because, yeah, that's a thing that kids in the States grew up with. I wasn't surprised at all. So, doesn't alarm me if and when I hear about people who trained in other things, got involved with BJJ, and essentially dropped everything else that they were doing and went to BJJ. And then, if it becomes so popular that now you can run a school, a successful school, because you're offering that which is popular, well, more power to you, right? You can't hold that against somebody, because it's like the essence of business is to give the people what they want, right? It's you're not going to be very successful if you're trying to force feed people, or if you're trying to give people um, what you think they want versus what they say they want. Now, that's not the only approach, because there is a thing called educate people, right? Harder to do, but still worth the effort. Educate people um, to towards what they want and also what they need. That's harder to do. Believe me, right? It's harder to do, but it's worth the effort. Okay. Um, Terry says that Norm Willis has a lot of young people doing JKD in Bury St. Emmons. Well, then Terry, tell Norm Willis to, as the cool kids say, holler at me, because his is a name that I've had on the list for a long time. All right. Steve Smith in Catterick, right, has a lot of young people too. AJ and the Pink Monster are in their 20s, right? Okay. Right. Yeah. Tim Becker says that Cookie should be Sifu or Guru, as she's a teacher and not the wife of our instructor, right? Yeah, right, Tim. I mean, if you wanted to be really technical, then um, it would depend on, again, on chronology, right? If the person is female and senior to you, or if the person is female and junior to you. But I never understood why people who should know better do refer, and this is not a reflection on her in any shape or form. I don't understand why people who should know better would refer to her as Simo. I think it's because they got confused between Simo and Simui. I think that's what it is, right? And they nobody ever corrected them, and so they go along using an incorrect title, right? Um, and Tim says the Little Dragons at the Innisano Academy, 4 to 14, also learn JKD. Right, yeah, see? Um, Octavio, oh my God. I kept calling him Javier, right? Oh man. Okay, well, I don't think Octavio watches this, so I'll be fine, right? But my apologies, right? Not Javier. See, I had the V and the I. I had the V and the I. And people who know who is to blame for this, right? Octavio Quintero. Okay, I won't make that mistake again. Right. Roy says, I don't know where people are getting this in the sound created Jake to promote Kali crap from. I don't know either. Uh, we said 27 arts because we include Savat. But then it would be 28 because I thought 27 made it magazine. I thought 27 made it jujitsu. So now it might be up to 28 by now. All right. Simon says, I like the way the IFO guys train. Yep. Yep. Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting the way that they train. Yes. All right. Tim says, in the 21 years I've been um, at the IAMA, he's never said it's composite, right? The 26 is what Dwight's talking about. Bruce Lee investigated, right? Yeah. No, it's not 26 hearts. That was, and again, I don't know why Paul said it. I don't know why even Hartzell said it, right? And then Simon says, no styles, although I do feel the grappling needs to be focused. Maybe it is. I haven't seen it in the way they train. I don't know who they are. Maybe you guys are talking about the IFO. Tim says the best way to counter something is to just say, I would just, and then do the thing that you said you would just do. Yes. Right. Um, Minimum of 10 years to be a BJJ black belt, 3 to 4 to become a JKD instructor. 3 to 4? Ha! Yeah. Well, Renee, I don't know that I would agree with you because, see, the problem with this whole instructorship thing in Jeet Kune, one of the problems is that when you're accepted, right, into the instructorship program, you're assigned or awarded the title instructor. So now it says it, let's say you get a certificate and it says instructor on it. Well, a lot of people, sometimes I think even the people who received the piece of paper, they delude themselves. It says apprentice instructor. And if you're in your first year of apprentice instructorship, then you might only have been around for what? Tim would know better than me. Um, you might have been on the seminar circuit, right, for 5 years. Okay. So if you're on the seminar circuit for 5 years, that's very different from going to class at the Inasano Academy for 5 years, 2 or 3 times a week. That's very different because 5 years, if you're doing 20 hours a year with Sifudan, then in 5 years you have 100 hours. But if you're doing 2 or 3 hours a week at the Inasano Academy, then you make 100 hours in a year or in 7.5 months. So that's a completely different thing, right? So anybody who's been around for a few years and now is allowed to join the instructor program and thinks, oh, I'm an instructor. It says apprentice instructor for a reason. So that 3 to 4 year thing, Renee, would apply only to apprentice instructors, right? And I was going to say something else about that, right? Yeah, we'll talk about that another time. Renee, bring me back on the Marshall Man podcast, and we could make that a thing, right? Okay, so G wants to know, um, deal with the flaw, the core, the premise meaning of anything, especially the meaning of words, right? Yes. So why are JKD folks still having this topic as a discussion? Wait, let me look at that again. Because concepts mean one thing and a task means another thing, and they have very specific functions. Yeah, but gee, the question is about original Jeet Kune Do and Jeet Kune Do concepts. So I could tell you why people are still having the discussion, right? It's a discussion because here's why, right? Now, this is not the answer that you'll like. There is no answer that you'll no. There is one answer that you would like, right? Okay, but it's not. But but I'm going to give you the answer to why JKD people are still having the discussion. They are still having the discussion because there's a group of people, right, who surfaced after the other group of people had been making names for themselves, and they had been making names for themselves without looking as much as they could like Bruce Lee, and by openly teaching things that Bruce Lee himself did not teach, did not study in depth, but their names were associated with Bruce Lee's name, and so they were becoming famous. And so there are people who objected to the fact that that was happening, while people who were sticking to trying to look like Bruce Lee or moving like Bruce Lee or teaching only what Bruce Lee taught them, they weren't as well known. Maybe some were, right? But the majority weren't as well known. And so that's what the magazines capitalized on. Oh, we got this group that looks at it this way and they're associated with Bruce Lee. We have this group that looks at it this way and they're also associated with Bruce Lee. We can sell more magazines if we turn this into an issue. And that's why the discussion continues to this day. The smart thing is to rise above the entire discussion and instead focus on the flaws in the premises that have been put forth. That's the higher evolved thing. But in order to do that, you have to be willing to accept that it could have been flawed from the get-go. And that means, what? So you're saying that Bruce Lee is not the greatest of all time? You're saying that I should look intelligently, I should look analytically at the fact that a guy was on a journey, working stuff out, and died accidentally, that I should not go, well, maybe he didn't get it all. Maybe my answers lie outside or beyond his unfinished project. Maybe by following some of his ideas, such as keeping an active mind, you know why I'm doing that, and continuing to search, maybe that leads you somewhere. You see? So, but anyhow, the reason why the discussion is going on is just that. It's a whole cult of personality thing. And the magazines developed it. And like how there are narratives that are pushed and promoted, right, in the realm of human endeavor. It's the same thing here. There's a narrative, right? One of the narratives is that Dan Inosanto, um, made money for himself, right? Abused his friendship with Bruce Lee, his relationship with Bruce Lee, to make money for himself, teaching stuff that had nothing to do with Bruce Lee. That's a narrative, right? Um, Another narrative is, well, I talked about it earlier, right? Because it's a narrative I push, that if you say, all I teach is what Bruce Lee taught me, well, then what you're saying is, you would say that only if you think that Bruce Lee was the complete deal. And if you think Bruce Lee was a complete deal, fine, right? Fine, okay. But then look up what complete means, and then if you can say, well, I looked up what complete means, and it does relate to Bruce Lee, well, then fine, right? For me, no. So I continue to look beyond. Okay. I know you're not going to be happy with that answer because you're never happy. But thanks for the question. Oh my God. Okay. So, all right, we really gotta get cracking here. Tim says, in the middle of America, right? Wrestling is definitely a big thing, right? So the middle of America. Well, isn't that where Eric Paulson and Greg Nelson are from? The Midwest, right? Terry, I don't know if this is a question for me or for Mick Shore or for Simon. Would you stay in BJJ not for the techniques but for the fight conditioning? Um, well, see, I could just replace BJJ with Muay Thai. Would you stay in Muay Thai not for the techniques but for the fight conditioning? You see? So, fight conditioning, you're talking about specifically BJJ fight conditioning. You see? Which is different from Muay Thai fight conditioning. So, me, I wouldn't stay in it just for the fight conditioning. No, because I got what I needed from it. So when I continue to work that stuff, sometimes I'll work it their way because of the conditioning that that would provide. But then I'm going to work it the other way, and that'll be a different kind of conditioning. You know, it's like Sifu Dan was talking in Dallas last weekend about, that swimming conditioning is not the same as running conditioning, and swimming and running conditioning, and I know this for a fact, are not the same as Muay Thai conditioning. No. So it's not like you could do one thing for conditioning and you're going to be at your peak in all the activities. No, it's kind of like every activity that you're involved in, you better train the conditioning, or you better train it in a way that it provides the specific conditioning, right? Um, Simon says, I started wrestling, wait, 3 years ago, age 47, and to me, it's a superpower. Yes, right? Goes well with JKD and my mindset. Yes, right? Okay. Sean says, I was always interested in wrestling, but I couldn't get over the singlet. Right? But we have a really good wrestler at our school, and his input is incredible. Yes, 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 yes. Todd says, well, in that case, oh, this is because I was talking about giving the customers what they want. But, Todd, going back to customers and what have you, right? Let's say the goal is to make $1 billion. What's the easiest thing in the world? Have a product or service that costs 1 million and sell it to one person. So unless it's $1 million DVD and you're willing to pay Eric Paulson $1 million, right? You see where I'm going with this, right? There's got to be a market, right? Because you're just a customer. You're just one customer. But if you're telling me that Todd, if you're telling me that there's a market out there, right, for trapping to grappling, I'll do the bloody DVD. Right? Todd says again, I don't think JKD would have been as big if Bruce was still alive. No, probably not. Probably not. I think Guru Inosano has done better than Bruce would have done. I don't know what you mean in that way. Guru is humble and soft spoken. Unless Bruce Lee would have become more calm in his later days, I believe he would have ruffled a lot of feathers even in today's world. Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, well, their personalities definitely were not the same, right? And Cesar says, if the arts are in constant evolution, what would be the third stage, transformation, after original JKD and JKD concepts? There will be a third. Well, it's what I described, that third stage, which I now own, right? That third stage is The ideas that are prevalent or promoted in original Jeet Kune Do, okay, and the idea of looking into other arts, right? Okay, but infusing. Let's talk about what Simon was talking about: simplicity and directness and efficiency and five ways of attack and all that stuff, right? Into those arts, as opposed to the arts in a wholesale manner. That would be the third stage. That's my stage. I own it, right? Okay, all right. I was reading. I was reading what G said here. Well, of course, the we'll get to the root of it off camera. Hello, what do you think this is, G? Right? Okay, all right. That's it. I gotta run. Okay. So thanks once again, guys, for hanging out with me. Let me do the quick sales thing again. So I told you, go to rebelgear.printify.me, and that's where you'll see the four tenets of Jeet Kune Do, the Legends in the Room coffee mug, Fire and Focus T-shirt, Fire and Focus coffee mug, all that kind of stuff. Right? Rebelgear.printify.me for that stuff. Go to Jeet Kune Do Drills on Facebook and follow that page for when it becomes activated. Go to what is it? Um, now I got URLs in my head. Um, PayPal.me/Unified MA Miami. Jesus. PayPal.me/Unified MA Miami. The Jeet Kune Do Journey Volume 1 is available there. PayPal.me/Unified MA Miami. I don't have a graphic for it, but you should. Sorry. I don't have a graphic for it, but go to titansofjkd.com, right, and start registering for next year's February event. It is February 6th and 7th, I believe, right? Titans of JKD. Look, people are talking about, look at the stuff that we just talked about, right? And this is self serving, yes, because Ron Reagan and I are the co hosts of Titans of Jeet Kune Do. So, yes, this is self serving, okay? Um, we talked about the people who are still around that spent time with Bruce Lee, right? Okay. The other thing that we have to talk about, right? And I don't know why I didn't mention them, okay? But big names in Jeet Kune Do. Well, Chris Kent is definitely a big name in Jeet Kune Do. Now, for people who know, Cass Magda is a big name in Jeet Kune Do, but Cass just doesn't do the self promotion stuff, right? So if he's a big name, um, people would say he's a big name in Silat, right? And Kali. Okay. But if you know what you know, and you know that Cass is a big name in JKD, right? But this is the deal. Okay. So there's not a whole lot of people left who spent time with Bruce Lee. Well, guess what? Chris Kent and Cass Magda are the two primary people who spent time with what's the word? Prime Dan Inosanto. Because you got to remember, Chris Kent started with Dan Inosanto in 1973, just a few months before Bruce Lee passed away, right? If you know how to do math, then you know how old Inosanto was at that time. And then Cass Magda came along like 5 years later, okay, right? But those two guys, if you wanna be on the receiving end of prime Inosanto, how Inosanto's mind worked, right? Still works, but to a lesser degree. Okay, simply because he's 89 years old now. I'm not saying that he's mentally incapacitated, or that's not what I mean. But The way I taught 40 years ago is not at all the way that I teach now. It can't be. Okay. But if you want to see prime in a sound, and I've said this before, and this is not a denigration in any way of anybody for whom this is their circumstance. But you just got to understand this. If Dan Inosanto is now 89 years old and you've been with him for 20 years, you've only been with him since he was 70 years old, 69, right? But you know what I mean. Okay. That means you never experienced him in his prime. So if you have an opportunity to experience two people who experienced him in his prime, and you can do it at Titans of JKD, February 7th and 8th in Miami, I'd love to hang with you, right? And we could have this kind of discussion in person. You get what I'm saying? Anyhow, go to titansofjkd.com. All the information is there, right? I think the only thing that's not there yet is well, we know what the hotel is, but I don't think I have a link for the hotel rooms yet. But I'll get that to you in a second, right? And that's it. That's it. Okay, I think that's all I got on this screen for you. All right, so this is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Rebel, signing off. Thank you guys very much for hanging out with me for 2 hours and 52 minutes. I really appreciate it, right? And we will do this again. No, not in a hurry. Not in a hurry, right? This Ask Me Anything is exhausted. No, I'm kidding. I love it, right? Let's see, Ron Reagan and I, we are on the road. No, we're not on the road next weekend. So I will let you know by Wednesday who's coming on the show next weekend. There's a guy, right, that it'd be kind of like this, right? Designed to piss people off. That's a clue, right? Anyhow, have a great weekend. Those of you in the States, have a great Labor Day weekend, and I'll see you next time. This is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Rebel, signing off. Take care now.